Jeffro from Two Hacks Garage. Well, I'm not at Jimmy's. I'm not at Kyle's. I'm not at a drag strip. I'm actually in my home shop. You've seen Jimmy and I talk about assembling an engine, machining an engine, firing up an engine, breaking in, all of that. The one thing you haven't seen us do is actually tear down an engine. We've torn down many engines, and the process, guys, is actually simple. So in this video, it's probably going to be a series of videos. We're going to talk about how we actually tear an engine down, find out what we're working with, and see what parts are good, see what parts are bad, and from there we kind of see what we need to work with. It's pretty simple to do. You just need to really take your time, kind of pay attention, and you need to be prepared. So what am I going to talk about as far as preparation? Well, obviously you need an engine, and you're going to need an engine stand. This one here I got on Amazon, pretty cheap, very affordable. This engine here, well, a friend of mine that I grew up with, her parents reached out to me and said, hey, we've got an old Pontiac 400. We no longer need it. Come and get it if you want it. So yep, guys, this good old classic American Iron V8 Pontiac 400 was free. My friend's parents, they had a really kick-ass 1978 Trans Am 4-speed car. I remember when I was young, really cool. I enjoyed talking to him about all the cool cars he had. He's at a time in his life now where he likes his trucks, he likes his motorcycles. He no longer needs this. He knew I liked working on this stuff, and it's very much appreciated. Today's world, when you come across something like this, it is always appreciated, and it's a great score. Not 100% sure what I'm going to do with this. I have a couple ideas, Ram Air 2, Ram Air 4. You didn't hear that. But you know what, guys? Let's talk about preparation. So some of the items you're going to need for preparation on this are quite simple. You're obviously going to need hand tools, and in a case like this with the American Classic V8, it's generally going to be SIE tools. You just never know, though. Sometimes people throw in some metric tools. A couple other good things to have. Quality breaker bars. These bolts have been on here forever, so quality breaker bars are a must. A couple other things, well, bolt storage. When you're taking bolts out, it's always a good idea to have somewhere, either a pan, trays like this, just to throw them in before you bag and tag them. Talking about bagging and tagging, a lot of guys use Ziploc bags. I actually use these here, and they're just a storage case with multiple bins in them. Like you said, I bought 3. I got these at Harbor Freight along with this. It's a real cheap investment. Next step on that, guys, well, index cards and a pen or a marker. And what I do is when I take bolts off, put them in this tray, get a piece off, I'm going to label those and put them in these bins. Generally speaking, I don't use a lot of factory hardware. I always use ARP. But for guys that want to reuse it, it's always handy to know what bolts you have organized, ready to go, and labeled. Another good tip, well, WD-40 or any penetrant lubricant. A lot of these bolts have been on here for a very long time, guys. So spraying stuff down in advance, going through it, getting them pre-soaked, helps you get those broke free and not snap them off. You snap a bolt off, it can be a real pain in the butt. Now here's something that's interesting. A lot of these things drip. I know we're going to drain the oil if there is any in it, but a lot of these things drip, guys. And I know they make drip pads and all that, but believe it or not, I get doggy training pads, which is actually kind of neat. What I do is I take one of these, a couple of them, and as you see, they're absorbent, and I actually put them underneath here like this. A couple of them actually works quite well. A couple other prep items, guys. I don't use hand tool or I don't use power tools when I do this. I want to feel the bolts. I want to feel the tension, see if things are cross-threaded, about ready to snap. I want to feel everything in here, especially when you're getting a stuff that's torqued down. If you're getting in there and it's like a main bolt or head bolt and one's loose, you might want to keep note of that and take a look at what's going on there. I always use my hands, just like in other videos Jimmy and I talked about. A lot of stuff we do, power tools are somewhat of a no-no. With this process, I kind of align myself with that. That being said, on some of these items here, once you get them loose, to speed up the process, I have an electric ratchet right here. It's very low torque, so this can kind of help when you get stuff loosened up. So with that, guys, what we're going to do is we're going to get started on step 1. I'll be right back. All right, so the first step is prep. We talked about what items you're going to need to prep. One thing I didn't touch on an item of prep is actually a torch. I use MAP. It burns hotter than those little blue propane. But the thing about this is it does burn hot, so you got to be careful, especially touching it, maybe overheating things. You know the rules on that. With this, though, you can also use a wax paraffin candle. And if we need to, I'll actually show you the trick on that. It's pretty cool. It's something that Jimmy taught me. So yeah, that's kind of a good tip. Another tip on this is when you're doing this, a wire brush. So the first step is identification. So when you get an engine, you kind of want to know what you're wanting to work with, whether it be Chrysler, whether it be Ford, Chevy, Pontiac, you name it. An engine isn't an engine. This is a Pontiac 400. But which Pontiac 400 is it? Is it out of a passenger car, low horsepower, small heads? Is it a Ram Air 2 400 out of a GTO? Is it a Ram Air 4 out of a Trans Am? Who knows? But they're all not the same. They have different heads, pistons, cranks, intakes, carburetors, on and on and on. Obviously, I can tell, seeing the intake and the small carburetor, that it's not one of the high-performance engines. That being said, you do want to identify what engine you're working with. So before you start making parts of, or lists of parts, what you need or what you think you need, first you really need to know what you have, what you're working with, so you can kind of get an idea down the road of what you're really wanting to do. I know from a standpoint of what we do in Jimmy's shop and what we do for other people, we highly modify engines. We hardly build stock engines. And something like this, I'm actually going to consider a core engine. Whether it be a 283 engine that's a core, knocking and banging and smoking, or a 400 on an engine stand like this that I don't know anything about, it's a core. That's what we're going to treat it as. So yes, let's find out what this is and get those in there, those numbers in there. Sorry for the pause there. I just had a little bit of a thought on that too. Every engine has different codes, different stamps, different date numbers, castings, you name it. They're not all the same. You're going to need to do your homework on what engines you have, whether it's Mopar, Ford, like I said, Chevy, GM, Pontiac, Buick, all of that type of stuff. The casting numbers are different places. And in some cases, even the same block of a 400, different years, they put them in different places. I know this is a Pontiac, so I went ahead and did about an hour worth of research online. Now, there is manuals and books that do describe this, but I just went to Google. I made it quick. You made use of technology and started diving into of what we have here. So since I already have those numbers, let's take a look at what this engine actually is. I'll be right back. Real quick before we get diving into this, one thing I didn't mention was actually cleaning of this. I know a lot of engines you get are really grimy, really greasy, really nasty and all that. In some cases, you can use items such as like Purple Power or, Zep or any of those to spray them down, let them sit, scrape, degrease, and all that. You can do that. My preference is if it isn't really that bad, I'll leave the grunge on there. It really doesn't bother me. You can use like the blue gloves and all that if you don't want to get your hands all messy. But the reason I don't do that is I don't want to risk the chance of getting water down into the engine. I want to see this thing the way it is. But that's your personal preference. If it's really nasty, just be careful when you clean all the gunk off of it. I just prefer, since this isn't that bad, there is a little grease and a little gunk, but I plan on getting dirty. You always see me wearing these black jackets. I go through a ton of them. I wash a ton of them. I just destroy them. So yeah, that's my opinion on pre-cleaning. Generally speaking, if I can scrape some off, I will. If not, I don't want to risk water getting down to the engine. So I just leave them as they are. So with that, let's get on to it. See you soon. All right, so one of the first numbers I found was on the back of the engine on the passenger side on the block, which is right here. This is where the wire brush comes in handy, maybe a little degreaser. It is 481988. I have my handy dandy little notebook here. That's another good thing to have. But as I went through and found out, the quick part of engine 481988 is 1971 to 1975. So I know I'm working with a 1971 to 1975 Pontiac 400. There's another area that you can see if it's cast 400, and I'll show you that right now. All right, well, this is the driver's side of the block, and if you see right there, it's kind of hard to see. I should have scrubbed that off, but that says Pontiac 400. Did some research, and these engines were cast, and so yeah, that's another area that's Pontiac 400. Also, if you look here, it's got 3 freeze plugs. That's on each side.
I want to say from like 55 to 66, the Pontiac V8s were 2 freeze plugs, and from 67 and up on the V8s, it was 3. So yeah, there is another spot where it confirms that it is a Pontiac 400.
All right, date coding. I want to know what the date code was on this. So after a little bit of research and a little bit of scrubbing, back of the block by the distributor, I found out that it says L211. After doing my research on that, I've determined that the date code, the L stands for December, the 21 stands for day 21, and the 1 stands for 1971. So this was cast December 21st, 1971. Next set of numbers. Well, it's on the passenger side, front of the engine, top of the cylinder before it meets the cylinder head. As you see, I scrubbed, and you see 6 digits and a letter. You also see the YX below that. So the YX, that's the block identification. Y and Z blocks were autos. W, which you don't see, was manual transmission. X is both. However, this is a YX. So I did a little bit of research again and determined the YX is an A-body platform, 1972, 400 cubic inch, 175 horsepower model, turbo 400 trans. I do know this was an automatic because it has the flex plate on the back, so that makes sense. The RPO code, which is the order code, was L65, and you would have seen a VIN R in the actual VIN plate on this. This had a 2-barrel carburetor, which you see right up there. And the block casting would have been 481988, and we already confirmed that. Also, that YX code determines that it is a 2-bolt main. So what in 1972 would have been the A-body platform? Well, that would have been the Tempest, the Le Mans, the Grand Am, the GTO, and the Grand Prix. Be right back. All right, that's kind of hard to see, but you can see some digits there and a number. This is in the front of the block. Again, passenger side, below towards the bottom where it meets the oil pan. What this is part of the VIN number. It's not going to have the complete number, so I don't know exactly what this came out of. But I do know by doing some more research that it says 22P362758. The first 2 signifies that it is a Pontiac. The second 2 signifies 1972. The P is the casting manufacturer plant. And this one happened to be in, well, coincidentally, Pontiac, Michigan. The last 6 is the sequential numbers of the VIN, 362758. One thing I didn't touch on up here, as you see the C304311, that has nothing to do with the VIN number. That is an engine sequential number. So this is kind of just like manufacturing, casting of the block of the sequential time frame when that was put in there. I couldn't find anything on decoding that, so if you guys do, let me know, and I will put it back in this video. See you in a few. All right, another good casting number on here is the head casting. Every cylinder head on these engines that they use for different models is different, and as you can see, that is 7J2. After doing my research on that, I determined that that is the low horsepower head, if you want to call it, designed for the 8.4-to-1 compression engine, which matches up with this series of engines. It's the 196, 177 small valves. They do have small ports, and on top of it, they have a large open chamber, large GC. So these aren't really a good candidate for performance, maybe a good economy head. However, I did see this on Kyle's engine when we did put his together on his old heads. One thing I do not like about these is pretty simple. So if you look here, here's your exhaust ports. You got a bolt here and a bolt here, and then you got your other exhaust ports, and you see a bolt here, but not here. You see a bolt here, but not here. Look closely, guys. See that exhaust manifold gasket? Yep, leaking right there. Obviously leaking right there. In my opinion, it's kind of a design flaw not to have even pressure going up on that exhaust port and going up on that exhaust port. So what I'm going to say on this up front, doing my homework, knowing what I want to do, and looking at that saying, well, these aren't really a good performance head, and really, in my opinion, they don't even really seal up that well. I know they make brackets for that, but right off the bat, guys, I'm going to say these are a candidate not for a rebuild. All right, so what do we have next here? Well, we've identified what engine we have. We know it's a 72 model engine. It is a low compression, low horsepower, kind of an economy passenger car, maybe semi-performance depending on the application. It is a very good core engine to start with. Pontiac V8s are a phenomenal engine. They made all kinds of torque. I, for one, just by looking at this now, knowing that it's a 2-barrel intake manifold, kind of the smog heads that aren't really a good design, I know the top end of this, whether it be carburetor, this intake, and these heads, most likely not going to use. So knowing that, I can start making a list of things that I'm going to need. Specifics on it, I don't know what I need yet, but I do know right off the bat, the top end of this motor isn't going to meet the needs of what I want. But that's not what we're talking about. The video of this is identification and preparation. Now that we've already identified everything, some of the prep work needs to happen. So, you know what? Does this engine spin over freely? A lot of these engines sat for a long time, maybe outside in a junkyard, no oil, maybe some oil, and they freeze up. That can really ruin your day when you go to rebuild one of these or tear it down, especially if you paid a decent amount of money for it. You should always check that up front before you get an engine. That'll kind of tell you what you're going to need to know moving forward, whether it's a good block, bad block, you name it. I, however, know that this engine sat inside of a garage and that the owner did spin it over freely about once a month. Steve is a really guy when it comes to maintenance. That's who I got it from, and he did the right thing on this. But if you don't know, the first step you want to do on this is actually pretty simple. You're going to remove the spark plugs in here, and you can use a fogging oil, you can use a little bit of motor oil. However, I have a penetrant lubricant here, the WD-40, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take spark plugs out, and I'm going to spray a little bit in there and let it sit. Be right back, guys. All right, guys. Well, as you saw, I took the spark plugs out and sprayed a little WD-40 in there. Normally what I would do is I would keep spraying that a little bit in, a little bit at a time over the period of, I don't know, half a day or so. And I would actually let it sit for a day. I'd come back the next day, spray a little bit more in there, and then go out in the afternoon or evening and attempt to crank this over. However, for time's sake, and I do know this already cranks over, I'm going to show you what would be done next. So assuming that you don't know if this turns over or not, and you put some lubricant down. Now, I prefer WD-40 or any good penetrating lubricant. Everybody has their brand to go to and method for getting that down in the cylinders. I just happen to like WD-40. So the next step you're going to want to do is you're going to want to attempt to turn this engine over. That's where your breaker bars come in handy, and what I use here is a ratcheting breaker bar from Icon. I really like this. I have a few of them. I keep one here, I keep one at Jimmy's, and I keep one at Kyle's. It's a very good unit. So basically what you're going to want to do is you're going to put it on the crankshaft nut that goes over the harmonic balancer and pulleys. And you're going to put that on there, and you're going to want to rotate this the same way as the engine turns. So I'm going to turn this, and I can hear everything moving inside. What you're hearing in the back is the distributor turning. As you can see, well, this cap has seen better days, so I'm going to get that out of the way. And I do have a couple bins over here, and one bin is kind of labeled junk, but I'm not getting rid of anything, and the other thing is going to be meant for parts that I'm taking off that I don't know what I'm going to do with yet. So if you take a listen, you can hear it turn it over. And it's got compression. Now this isn't doing a compression test, but I can hear the actual air moving through there and popping through the cylinders. Yeah, this is not an actual compression test. I've seen some videos where people crank these over and think that's how you can test compression. No, this is just checking to see if it's, operating or not. So yeah, spins over nice and freely, guys. That's a very good sign. Don't know what the cylinders look like yet. Don't even know anything about it. So we really need to get tearing down. All right. Well, you know what, guys? That's going to be video one of a multi-part series on tearing an engine down. It's probably going to be quite a few videos. I'm going to go into detail. This is meant for the beginners. This is how Jimmy taught me on how to tear an engine down, disassemble it, and inspect it. Video one, pretty simple. Your prep work, the tools you need, and identification of the engine, and seeing if it's seized up, seeing if it rotates. I think I'm in a good spot with this one. Turns over freely. It's a Pontiac 400. It's a good core engine. I've got some ideas for it, but until then, guys, I'm going to get cleaned up. I got a whole lot of work to do. I actually have to get over to Jimmy's and start working on another engine. But yeah, guys, this is going to be part of a multi-part series on the disassembly of engines. Jimmy and I have shown you quite a bit on putting them together and machining them. Well, before you can do that, you actually got to tear one down and see what you got. Next video will be pretty cool. We're going to start tearing into this. Till next time, guys, have a good one.